Like a lot of people who use a bicycle as a mode of transportation, I've been in some wrecks, some crashes, some of them involving pretty significant injury at one point or another. And the story that I'm going to tell you is about probably the worst that happened to me when I was a graduate student down in Southern Illinois at Carbondale. And I'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to sort of like mention just a few other cases that happened to me because I used to use a bike to get around just about everywhere. Once I had a 10-speed as opposed to just a regular, old bike. That meant mobility and freedom for me from really, I want to say like 12, 13 onward. And so, I could get to other towns quite easily, going either on the highway or in some cases going to Waukesha by taking this trail that had been train tracks that were torn up and then replaced with gravel. And so, if I needed to get somewhere, I didn't have a car, I would just bike everywhere. And I remember, having a few crashes here and there. It was basically my fault. I also got just nailed by somebody who clipped me while I was in Waukesha riding, I think on White Rock, and it was right by this bar and bowling alley. And the person hit me, and I was so dazed I didn't get contact information or anything. And they fortunately weren't going super fast, but they turned in to this place as I was alongside them and just knocked me off my bike going about 20 miles an hour or so. And so there were things like that. I'm sure I probably took some knocks to the head here and there. And when you fall, you get scraped up even if you're wearing jeans or protective gear like that. And I never wore a helmet, unfortunately. I probably should have been, but back then helmets were viewed as kind of for nerds and stuff like that. Anyway, I used a bike whenever I didn't have a car. And now that I think about it, in my teen years I did that. When I was a soldier over in Germany, I bought a mountain bike, and used that to get all over the place. And then I didn't really have a bike when I was in college. Then I was doing a lot of running, But then I also had a car after too long. And then, in graduate school, I bought myself a bike, which got stolen, and I replaced it with a cheap Walmart bike that nobody was going to steal. And then, eventually that broke down. And then my relatives gave me a more sturdy bike that had been bought at Walmart that had saddlebags and stuff like that. And so I would use that to get all over Carbondale when I wasn't taking the bus or walking. I would bike from place to place, and it was quite convenient. And I didn't have to worry with a crappy heavy bike like that about anybody going through the work of breaking a lock to steal it, as they had done with a more expensive bike. And so I would take my bike to class, and I would go into town if I was going to meet with friends. Sometimes I'd get quite tipsy, and sometimes I'd lock it up and stay somewhere, and sometimes I'd bike back home, kind of half in the bag. Now, the time that I got hurt, so I should explain. I lived in this trailer park that was off of a highway, Highway 51, if I remember, as were a whole bunch of other ones, and it was about maybe 1.5 miles north or maybe south. North of the campus. And so I would, ride down Highway 51. And there was a nice big shoulder, concrete in parts. If you got further out of town, it was gravel. But then you would just ride on the road, right? And so I used this as a common way to get in and out of campus and also Carbondale itself. So Carbondale itself, the main drag was further south from the campus, and there are all sorts of places along there. there was also a philosophy house on the south side, and it was called the Philosophy House because a bunch of guys in the department lived there, and we'd, hang out and have parties there. Some of my other friends lived on that same block. So I would, I'd be biking back and forth, and we're talking about 3-4 miles, right? Which on a bike you can cover very, very quickly. So one night, I was biking home, and, I'd go pretty fast, especially since I knew the area, and, I could count on these, the roads and the shoulders as being relatively clear of car parts or rubble or anything like that. The main thing you had to watch out for in Carbondale was sort of a curiosity. Carbondale, it's called Carbondale because it's a coal-producing region, and they don't use that coal anymore. It's too high in sulfur. So they have a lot of extra coal around, and instead of using salt or sand like most places do in the winter for ice and snow, they use coal dust. So that stuff would kind of accumulate, and you could skid out if you weren't careful. Anyway, I'm biking home. It's at nighttime, and I'm just flying. And then suddenly, boom, I'm off of the bike, and I'm hitting the ground, and my leg is twisted up under me, and I'm looking around like, what in the hell happened here, right? As if somebody just punched me. And as it turns out, they had taken out a portion of the shoulder, like with a concrete saw. They just cut it entirely out, and it was maybe a 10-inch to 12-inch gap that I had gone right down into, which was gravel. And then, of course, my bike sort of foundered, and I fell off of it myself. I'm lucky I didn't hit my head because, there was an edge of concrete. I could have killed myself, quite frankly, if things had gone a little bit differently. And so, it wasn't well lit at all. The lights were out in that area. And I got myself up, and I could see by basically moonlight what was going on. And I was like, what the hell? It wasn't marked. There weren't any cones. Somebody, in the traffic or road department had just come along and cut out that section because they were probably going to put a new section in. And, I could feel my left knee because my leg had gotten kind of twisted. I could feel my left knee hurting now, and I could tell that it was starting to swell. And, I'm sort of getting my bearings again. The pain is starting to hit me in waves. It's not just my knee, it's my elbows. I got banged up quite a bit. And I'm like, oh, man, what the hell? So I picked my bike up, and my bike is fine, which is great because I'm still about a mile away from the trailer park. And I lived way, way, way in the back of the trailer park as well. So just getting there isn't quite enough. And I could feel my knee starting to swell, and I'm like, oh, should I walk home? But this is going to get more and more painful. I've got a mile to go. It's going to take me, normally 15 minutes to do that. I bet it's going to take me half an hour now. And I don't know how banged up I actually am. So I got on my bike and stood it up. And it was, at first it wasn't that bad. And then after a while, it became more and more agonizing using my left knee because, what are you going to do? Pedal with just one foot or something and hold the other one out? That would hurt as well. So I'm pedaling along, and I get myself down the road, and, luckily the trailer park, kind of goes downhill. So I could kind of coast, but you got to, meander around a bit. And I finally get myself to my own trailer, and I, I leave the bike outside and stagger up the steps, unlock my door, and get myself inside, turn on the light because I want to see just what's going on. And my pants are kind of torn there. Everything was pretty messed up. I had scrapes all over the place. So, I get my pants off, and look, and my knee is already like swelling up in size and starting to, look pretty bad. There's a big gash as well. And I'm like, oh shit, what am I going to do? Is this something I need to go to the hospital for? Who can I call to come get me and take me? I'm not going to get an ambulance, that's for sure, because I don't have the money for that. And then I thought, well, maybe I can just like take it easy and, see what it looks like in the morning. And, the pain woke me up a couple of times. I took some, over-the-counter painkillers, but of course they didn't do an awful lot. And I wake up pretty early the next morning in bed. And actually at that time I had a mattress on the floor that I was sleeping on. And so it's pretty messed up. And I look at it now, the knee is like swollen and throbbing, and I can barely do anything with it. I get up and I realize I can't do much standing on this knee or even walking. I can kind of hobble a little bit, but it's painful. And, I'm like, well, nothing seems to be actually infected, and I don't think I broke anything, but this looks like a really, really bad sprain. It's pretty painful. What can I do? So for the next 3-4 days, I didn't go anywhere, and I hobbled around inside of my little trailer. Fortunately, there's just a bedroom, a bathroom, and then a big living room. And I spent a lot of time just kind of like laying on the couch and, reading books, alternating between reading books and falling asleep. I had enough food on hand that I didn't have to go anywhere. Cans of soup and things that I'd cooked before, and spaghetti sauce, those sorts of things. And I just kind of made the best of it. And, after a few days, one of my neighbors actually came and knocked on the door to check on me because they hadn't seen me around. And they were like, did you leave or something? I mean, I see his bike here, so what's the deal? So I made my way, and it took, a little while to get to the door, and they were relieved to know that I was okay. And that was kind of a nice thing for me, a reminder that I wasn't like totally on my own at that point. And I never wound up, going to the hospital, getting it checked out. That may be something that had to do with why later on I tore 2 ligaments in that same knee years and years and years later. Who knows about cumulative damage? But it was that was pretty painful. And the pains kind of changed over time. I think many of you have probably experienced things like this with injuries. There's many different sorts of pain. There's the hot throbbing, pulsing pain. There's the sharp, like almost a pin is going into you kind of pain. There's the dull ache of the muscles around as they're trying to compensate, right? We could go on and on and on. And I'll tell you, I won't say that I experienced the entire spectrum of possible bodily pains, but I certainly was exposed to a considerable repertoire, let's say, with that leg, and then everything else having to adjust around it. And I was kind of worried that this had become, a more permanent injury. It was that bad. I never ended up following up with why that section of road or shoulder for the road had been cut out. I was more concerned just with like getting better and trying to remain on track for the classes that I was enrolled in, and didn't go to sessions for that the rest of that week. And, after a while, everything kind of evened out. I'd forgotten about it altogether until something jogged my memory lately. I was thinking about Carbondale, and then I remembered that crack up and how harrowing that was. And, the last thing that I'll say is, sometimes you're faced with these sorts of painful situations. It's pain on this side, it's pain on this side, and you got to figure out which of the 2 or 3 options you're going to take, and none of them are good. Getting up on that bike, riding, the additional mile to where I lived, going down and settling myself in, that. It was very, very painful to do that. I was worried as I was doing it, but it sure beat trying to walk that mile to the place as well. I don't know if I would have made it had I walked. And who knows what would have happened then. There wasn't anybody on the highway at that time, and it was like, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night. So what a mess that was. So anyway, there's the story of my bike injury down in Carbondale and how I dealt with it.